My best friend showed up at my rehearsal dinner and announced, "I need everyone to know what the groom did during my test." She was holding Ryan's phone above her head like a trophy, while my entire family and his family sat frozen at the country club banquet hall we'd rented for 70 people. What test? What are you talking about? I stood up from the head table where Ryan and I had just been toasting to our wedding tomorrow. Melissa walked between the tables, making sure everyone could see her. "I've been testing Ryan for the past month to make sure he deserves you. He failed." She waved his phone around and Ryan jumped up trying to grab it from her, but she pulled it away. "Give me my phone. You had no right to take it." Ryan's face was white and his hands were shaking. His mother was already crying and his father looked ready to call security. "I had every right. I'm the maid of honor. It's my job to protect the bride." Melissa pulled out a folder from her bag and started passing out papers to the guests. "These are the results of my loyalty examination." Page 1 shows the text messages Ryan sent to the woman I hired to flirt with him at his gym. People were looking at the papers, then at Ryan, then at me. I grabbed one of the pages, but it was just normal responses like, "Thanks, but I'm engaged. And my fiance wouldn't appreciate this." Nothing incriminating at all. These messages show he was faithful. What's your point? I tried to take the other papers away, but Melissa had already distributed them to every table. That's just the first test. Look at page 2. I created a fake social media account pretending to be his ex, Rachel, and messaged him. He responded. The second page showed Ryan writing back, "Please don't contact me. I'm getting married tomorrow and I've moved on again." Nothing wrong with what he'd written. "You're insane. You catfished my fiance to test him." Ryan's brother stood up looking furious. "She's been stalking me for a month, following me to work in the gym. She even showed up at my bachelor party dressed as a waitress." Melissa smiled like she was proud of herself. "And you didn't even notice me, which proves you were drinking too much. A good husband would have recognized his bride's best friend, even in disguise." Strike 2. My mother tried to intervene. "Melissa, honey, maybe we should discuss this privately," but Melissa wasn't done. She pulled out her laptop and connected it to the venue's screen system that was supposed to show our engagement photos during dinner. This is security footage from outside Ryan's apartment building. Notice the timestamp. The grainy video showed Ryan entering his building at 11:47 p.m. This was last Tuesday when he said he was working late, but his office closes at 9 quiet. Where was he for almost 3 hours? Ryan threw up his hands. "I went to the jeweler to pick up your wedding gift, then got dinner with my brother to calm my nerves about the wedding. You can check my credit card." Melissa shook her head like he was a child making excuses. "You should have been home studying the wedding vows I wrote for you. Did you even read them? Let's find out." She pulled out another stack of papers from her seemingly endless bag. "Everyone, turn to page 3. These are the vows I wrote for Ryan to memorize. I gave them to him 3 weeks ago. Ryan, recite them now." The papers had 5 paragraphs of the most over-the-top promises I'd ever read. Things like, "I promise to call you every hour when we're apart, and I vow to never have female friends or coworkers. I never agreed to say these vows. You slipped them under my door with no explanation. I thought it was a joke." Ryan looked at me desperately. "I wrote my own vows, real ones." Melissa turned to face the crowd. "A truly devoted groom would have memorized anything the maid of honor gave him. This proves he doesn't take the wedding seriously. But here's the worst part." She clicked to the next slide on her laptop. It was a photo of Ryan at a restaurant with a woman. This is Ryan having lunch with another woman just yesterday, the day before his wedding. I recognized the woman immediately. That's his sister, Julia. She flew in from Seattle for the wedding. Melissa scoffed. "That's what he wants you to think. But look closer. They're sharing food, intimate behavior." And she touched his hand twice during the meal. I counted. Julia stood up from her table, looking shocked. "I'm literally his sister. You watched us have lunch? What is wrong with you?" Melissa ignored her and turned to me. The final test was the most important. I offered Ryan a deal. I told him I would give him $50,000 to call off the wedding and leave town. I said, "You'd be better off without him and I could take care of you instead." She pulled out her phone and played a recording of Ryan's voice. Ryan's voice came through the recording clear and steady, saying he wouldn't take any amount of money to leave me, that Melissa was out of her mind for even suggesting it. I felt this wave of relief wash over me, but at the same time, I was so angry I could barely breathe. My best friend, since 2nd grade, had just tried to bribe my future husband to abandon me at the altar. I grabbed the phone from Melissa's hand before she could pull it away and stopped the recording. She reached for it, but I held it behind my back, staring at her like I was seeing a stranger wearing my best friend's face. The banquet hall had gone completely silent, except for someone's grandmother coughing in the back corner. Ryan's father, Brian, pushed his chair back so hard it scraped against the floor, making this awful screeching sound that made everyone jump. He stood up and walked straight to the country club manager, who was hovering near the kitchen doors, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Brian started talking to him in this low voice, but I could hear every word because the room was so quiet. He told the manager to call security right now because this had gone far enough and someone needed to remove this woman from the property immediately. Melissa clutched her laptop against her chest with one arm and held the folder of papers with her other hand, like they were the most important things in the world. She turned to face everyone in the room and started talking faster, her words tumbling over each other. She insisted that everyone needed to see the rest of her findings before making any decisions about tomorrow's wedding. She said she had documented everything over the past month, and there were patterns of behavior that proved Ryan wasn't ready for marriage. Her hands were shaking so badly the papers rattled. I looked around the banquet hall at 70 confused and uncomfortable faces staring back at me. My grandmother was crying into a napkin at table 4, her shoulders shaking. Ryan's cousins were all leaning toward each other and whispering behind their hands at table 6. The wedding coordinator was standing against the wall, frantically texting someone, probably her boss or maybe a lawyer. The rehearsal dinner we had spent 3 months planning and thousands of dollars on had turned into this public interrogation of my relationship. I had no idea how to fix this or make it stop or get things back to normal. My mother, Diane, got up from her seat and walked over to Melissa with her hands out in front of her like she was approaching a scared animal. She spoke in this gentle voice she used to use when I had nightmares as a kid, suggesting that maybe she and Melissa should step outside to talk privately about all of this. But Melissa shook her head so hard her hair flew around her face. She said, "This concerned everyone here because they all needed to know what kind of man I was marrying before they watched me make the biggest mistake of my life tomorrow." Her voice had this edge to it I had never heard before, something manic and desperate that scared me way more than her accusations about Ryan. This wasn't the Melissa who had helped me study for tests and braided my hair before school dances and held my hand at my grandfather's funeral. Jasper stood up from his seat at table 3 and pulled out his phone. He said he needed to clear something up right now before this got any more out of control. He confirmed that Ryan was with him for those 3 hours last Tuesday, and he started scrolling through his phone to find proof. He held up his screen to show his credit card receipts from the restaurant where they had dinner that night, the timestamp showing 8:47 p.m. for the bill. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. He added that Melissa had followed them to the restaurant and sat 3 tables away watching them the entire time. He said he thought it was weird but didn't mention it to anyone because he figured she just happened to be there. But now he realized she had been following Ryan on purpose, documenting his movements, stalking him. The country club manager came back into the room with 2 security guards trailing behind him. They were both big guys wearing black uniforms with radios clipped to their belts. The manager walked up to Melissa and spoke quietly, asking her to please leave the property. She refused immediately, her voice getting louder. She said she had a right to be here as the maid of honor, and she was protecting me from making the biggest mistake of my life. The 2 security guards positioned themselves on either side of her, but didn't touch her or try to physically remove her yet. The 2 security guards positioned themselves on either side of her, but didn't touch her or try to physically remove her yet. They just stood there waiting for instructions while Melissa kept talking. I finally found my voice, and it came out stronger than I expected. I told Melissa that what she did wasn't protection. It was stalking and harassment. I said she had no right to follow Ryan around for a month, to hire women to flirt with him, to create fake social media accounts, to show up at his bachelor party in disguise. Every word felt like I was breaking something between us that could never be fixed. She looked at me with this expression of genuine confusion, like she honestly couldn't understand why I wasn't thanking her. She said she had spent so much time and effort making sure Ryan deserved me that she had sacrificed her own time and money to protect me, and this was how I repaid her. Melissa pulled out her phone again and started scrolling through it with shaking fingers. She began reading text messages between us from the past year out loud to everyone in the room. She pointed out every single time I'd complained about Ryan working late or mentioned a small disagreement we had. She read a message from 6 months ago where I said I was annoyed that Ryan forgot to pick up milk on his way home. She read another one from 3 months ago where I mentioned we had argued about whose family to visit for Thanksgiving. She had been keeping a file on our relationship problems this whole time, saving every negative thing I said and interpreting normal couple stress as red flags that justified her month-long investigation. Ryan sat down heavily in his chair and put his head in his hands. His whole body seemed to collapse in on itself. His mother, Carly, got up from her seat and moved to stand behind him with her hands on his shoulders. She was glaring at Melissa with this look of pure anger I had never seen on her face before. I realized my future husband had been stalked for weeks by someone he thought was my friend, someone he had welcomed into his life because she was important to me and I had no idea it was happening. I felt guilty even though I knew logically I didn't cause this and couldn't have prevented it. My father, Hudson, stood up from the head table and his voice came out firm and commanding in a way I rarely heard from him. He told security to remove Melissa from the property right now, not in 5 minutes, but immediately. Melissa seemed to finally understand that she was losing control of the situation. Her face crumpled and she started crying, tears running down her cheeks and dripping off her chin. She begged me not to let them throw her out before she could explain everything properly. She said if I would just listen to the rest of her evidence, I would understand that she was doing this because she loved me. I held up my hand to stop the security guards and turned to face Melissa directly. My voice came out steadier than I expected when I asked her why she really did this. She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, and her mascara smeared across her cheek. She started talking about her sister getting married 3 years ago, and how the husband turned out to be cheating the whole time. Nobody knew until 6 months after the wedding when her sister found hotel receipts and text messages. Melissa said she watched her sister fall apart, and she couldn't couldn't let that happen to me because I was like a sister to her, and she loved me too much to let me make the same mistake. Her hands were shaking as she talked, and she kept looking at me like she expected me to suddenly understand and thank her. The wedding coordinator appeared at my elbow and spoke quietly so only I could hear. She said we needed to wrap this up because the country club had other events scheduled and we were already 30 minutes over our reserve time. I looked at the clock on the wall and realized it was almost 9 p.m. We hadn't even done the actual rehearsal yet, and my wedding was in 19 hours. The coordinator's face was apologetic but firm as she gestured toward the banquet hall staff waiting by the kitchen doors. I felt this wave of exhaustion hit me all at once. I turned back to Melissa and made the decision quickly, before I could second-guess this myself. I told her she needed to leave now and we would talk tomorrow after I had time to process everything. She immediately started to protest and reached for my arm, but I pulled away. I said if she really cared about me, she would respect this boundary and go home. The security guards moved closer, and Melissa looked between them and me with this expression of disbelief. She clutched her evidence folder against her chest like it was something precious. Security took her by the elbows and started walking her toward the exit. She called back over her shoulder that I was making a mistake and that she had more evidence I needed to see. Her voice got fainter as they led her through the doors and into the lobby. I heard the main entrance doors close, and then there was this moment of complete silence in the banquet hall. The silence broke immediately, and everyone started talking at once. Ryan's family was gathered around his parents, and I could hear his mother crying harder now. My family looked embarrassed and kept glancing at Ryan's family like they wanted to apologize but didn't know what to say. I stood in the middle of it, all trying to figure out if my wedding could still happen tomorrow or if this disaster had ruined everything. Guests were collecting their coats and purses, and some were already heading toward the exits without saying goodbye. The wedding coordinator touched my shoulder again and gestured for Ryan and me to follow her to a quiet corner near the windows. She asked us directly if we were proceeding with tomorrow's ceremony. Her clipboard was in her hands, and she had her pen ready like she needed an answer right now. Ryan reached for my hand, and his palm was sweaty. He said he still wanted to marry me if I still wanted to marry him. His voice cracked a little on the last word, and I could see how much tonight had cost him. I looked at his face and thought about everything Melissa had accused him of, and how he had handled it all with honesty. Despite the chaos and the humiliation, and my best friend losing her mind in front of 70 people, my answer was yes. I squeezed his hand and told the coordinator the wedding was on. She looked relieved and started making notes on her clipboard about adjustments we would need for tomorrow. We attempted a quick run-through of the ceremony with the officiant while the remaining guests finished their now cold dinner in awkward silence. The officiant kept his voice low and professional as he walked us through our positions. I kept stumbling over where I was supposed to stand because my brain wouldn't stop replaying Melissa's accusations. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look of genuine belief on her face that she was helping me. The officiant had to repeat his instructions 3 times before I finally got my positioning right. Ryan's hand stayed in mine the whole time, and I could feel him trembling slightly. The rehearsal took 15 minutes instead of the planned hour, and nobody clapped when we finished. My mother tried to smile at me from her seat, but it looked forced. Ryan's father had his arm around his mother and was whispering something to her. The wedding coordinator thanked everyone for coming and reminded them that tomorrow's ceremony started at 2 p.m. Guests filed out quietly, and several of Ryan's relatives didn't make eye contact with me as they left. Ryan and I left the country club separately as planned, since we weren't supposed to see each other before the wedding. He kissed my forehead in the parking lot and told me he loved me. I watched him drive away in his car and then got into mine. My phone started buzzing before I even pulled out of the parking space. I looked down and saw text messages from Melissa already appearing on my screen. 17 messages came through during my drive to my parents' house. I stopped at a red light and glanced at a few of them. She was apologizing, but also insisting she did the right thing, and I would understand someday. One message said she had more evidence she hadn't shown yet. Another said Ryan was manipulating me and I couldn't see it because I was too close to the situation. I put my phone in my purse and focused on driving. My mother was waiting up when I got to their house. She made tea without asking if I wanted any, and we sat at the kitchen table where Melissa and I used to do homework together as kids. The chairs were the same ones from when we were in middle school. Mom set a mug in front of me and wrapped her hands around her own mug. She asked gently if I had noticed any other concerning behavior from Melissa lately. The question hung in the air between us. I started thinking about the past few months and small incidents I had dismissed as Melissa being overprotective or quirky, things that seemed weird. I started thinking about the past few months and small incidents I had dismissed as Melissa being overprotective or quirky, things that seemed weird at the time, but I had explained away because she was my best friend and I trusted her. I told my mother about the wedding dress situation first. Melissa had insisted on coming to every single dress appointment and she wanted to approve my final choice. When I picked a dress she didn't like, she cried for an hour in the bridal shop. The sales lady had looked so uncomfortable and kept offering us tissues. Melissa said the dress made me look like I was trying too hard and that Ryan would think think I was desperate. I bought the dress anyway, but I felt guilty about it for weeks. Then there was the guest list drama. Melissa tried to convince me to uninvite Ryan's female coworkers from the wedding. She said it was inappropriate to have other women there who saw Ryan every day and might have feelings for him. I had refused, but she brought it up at least 5 more times. My mother listened and nodded, and her face got more concerned with each story. I told her about the phone calls too. Melissa had called me every single day for the past month, asking detailed questions about Ryan's schedule and behavior. Where was he going after work? Who was he meeting for lunch? What time did he get home? I thought she was just being interested in my life, but now I realized she was building her case against him. My phone rang at 11 p.m. and startled both of us. I looked at the screen and saw it was Julia calling from her hotel. I answered and she sounded shaken. She said Melissa had shown up in the hotel lobby about 20 minutes ago asking to talk to her about Ryan. Hotel security had to ask Melissa to leave after she refused to go away on her own. Julia's voice was higher than normal and she talked fast. She said Melissa kept insisting they needed to compare notes about Ryan's suspicious behavior. Melissa told her that as Ryan's sister, Julia had a responsibility to protect me from him. She said Melissa had a notebook with her that had dates and times and locations written in it. Security finally escorted her out when she tried to follow Julia to the elevators. Julia asked if I was okay and if the wedding was still happening tomorrow. I told her yes to both questions, but my voice didn't sound convincing even to me. I hung up with Julia and stared at my phone screen. Ryan needed to know what was happening. I pressed his contact and he answered on the first ring. His voice sounded tired and strained when he said hello. I told him about Melissa showing up at his sister's hotel and getting escorted out by security. He was quiet for a long moment and then admitted he'd been getting calls and texts from her all evening too. My stomach dropped. She was contacting him right now, tonight after everything that happened at the rehearsal dinner. He said she'd sent him at least 15 articles about prenuptial agreements in the past 2 hours, statistics about divorce rates, links to marriage counseling websites. Each message included a note saying it wasn't too late to reconsider if he had any doubts about our relationship. She was still trying to convince him to leave me even after being thrown out of the rehearsal dinner in front of everyone we knew. I felt sick thinking about how she was harassing him while I sat at my parents' kitchen table. He said every text from her made him feel worse, like she was trying to plant seeds of doubt in his mind the night before our wedding. I asked if he wanted to come over to my parents' house so we could talk in person, but he said no. His family was still at his apartment trying to process what happened, and he needed to deal with them first. We stayed on the phone anyway. Neither of us wanted to hang up. For the next 2 hours, we talked about everything that happened at the rehearsal dinner. He went through each of Melissa's accusations point by point, explaining where he actually was and what he was actually doing during all the times she'd been following him. The gym visits where she hired someone to flirt with him. The lunch with his sister that she photographed. The bachelor party where she disguised herself as a waitress. His voice got quieter when he talked about that last one. He said the idea that she'd been watching him for weeks without him knowing made him feel violated in a way he couldn't quite explain, like his privacy had been stripped away, and he'd been living under surveillance without consent. He confessed that when Jasper told him tonight about recognizing Melissa at the bachelor party, he felt physically sick. She'd been in the same room with him and his friends, serving them drinks, listening to their conversations, and he had no idea. He kept wondering what else she'd done that he didn't know about, what other boundaries she'd crossed, what other private moments she'd witnessed or recorded. I listened and realized this had traumatized him in ways that wouldn't just disappear after tomorrow's wedding. He wasn't just upset about the public humiliation at the rehearsal dinner. He was genuinely scared of what Melissa might do next. We finally hung up at midnight and I tried to sleep, but my brain wouldn't shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Melissa's face at the rehearsal dinner. So convinced she was helping me, I fell asleep around 2 hours in the morning and woke up 3 hours later with my stomach in knots. My wedding day, I reached for my phone on the nightstand and saw 43 text messages from Melissa that had come in overnight. I scrolled through them with shaking hands. The first dozen were apologies. She was sorry for upsetting everyone, sorry for the timing, sorry for not presenting her evidence more carefully. Then the messages shifted to detailed explanations of why each test was necessary and scientifically valid. She'd researched loyalty testing methods used by private investigators. She'd consulted online forums about catching cheaters. She'd developed a systematic approach to evaluating Ryan's character because she couldn't trust him based on my judgment alone. The messages got longer and more frantic as the night went on. By the end, she was sending paragraphs about how marriage is a lifetime commitment and she'd rather hurt my feelings now than watch me get divorced later like her sister did. I put the phone face down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. This was my wedding day, and I was reading text messages from my former best friend explaining why stalking my fiancé was an act of love. My bridesmaids started arriving at 8 in the morning. I could hear them them downstairs talking to my mother in hushed voices. When they came up to my room, they were all checking their phones constantly. I realized they were texting each other about whether Melissa would show up. One of them finally asked me directly if Melissa was still the maid of honor. I looked at the empty space where her dress was supposed to be hanging and admitted I never officially was uninvited her. I didn't know if she'd try to come to the wedding. I didn't know if we needed to warn security to keep her out. My cousin pulled out her phone and said she'd call the venue to make sure they had a photo of Melissa and instructions not to let her in. The other bridesmaids nodded like this was a totally normal thing to do on a wedding day. Add the maid of honor to the band list. I felt the situation getting more real with every passing minute. At 9 Sao, I went into the bathroom and closed the door. I pulled up Melissa's contact and stared at it for a full minute before pressing call. She answered immediately. Her voice sounded hopeful and eager, like maybe I was calling to forgive her and let her come to the wedding after all. I took a deep breath and told her as calmly as I could that she was no longer my maid of honor and she wasn't welcome at the wedding today. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. Then she started crying, big gasping sobs that made me grip the phone tighter. She begged for another chance, said she'd apologize to everyone, promised she'd behave perfectly if I just let her be there. She said she'd already bought a new dress specifically for today, and she'd been my best friend for 20 years, and she couldn't miss my wedding. Please don't do this. Please let me fix it. Please give me one more chance. I stayed firm, told her my decision was final. Her crying stopped abruptly, and her tone shifted completely. She said I was making a huge mistake marrying Ryan without completing her full evaluation process. She'd only shown me the preliminary findings at the rehearsal dinner. She claimed she had more evidence she hadn't revealed yet. Testimony from Ryan's ex Rachel that she'd tracked down and interviewed last week. Rachel had things to say about Ryan's behavior and relationships that I needed to hear before I legally bound myself to him. She said if I went through with this wedding without seeing all the evidence, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. Her voice had that manic edge again, the same one from the rehearsal dinner, and it made my hands start shaking. I told her that contacting Ryan's ex crossed every possible line, and I was done with this conversation. She started yelling, said I was brainwashed, that Ryan had manipulated me into choosing him over our 20-year friendship. Conversation. She started yelling, said I was brainwashed, that Ryan had manipulated me into choosing him over our 20-year friendship, that I couldn't see clearly anymore because I was too emotionally involved, that she was the only person who could be objective about this situation, and I was throwing away the one person who actually cared about my well-being. I hung up while she was mid-sentence and immediately blocked her number. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I sat on the bathroom floor with my back against the door and tried to breathe normally. My mother knocked softly and asked if I was okay. I opened the door and she found me sitting there with tears running down my face, ruining the makeup the artist had already started. She didn't say anything, just sat down next to me on the cold tile floor and pulled me against her shoulder. I sobbed about losing my best friend on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, about how Melissa and I had planned our weddings together since we were kids, and now she wasn't even invited to mine, about how I kept waiting to wake up and find out this was all some horrible nightmare. My mother held me and stroked my hair and let me cry until I had nothing left. Then she said quietly that real friends don't stalk your fiancé or try to sabotage your wedding, no matter how much history you share. That sometimes people we love turn out to be people we need to protect ourselves from. That it's okay to grieve the friendship while also recognizing it had become toxic. I nodded against her shoulder and tried to believe her. The hairstylist and makeup artist worked quietly to fix the damage from my crying. They didn't ask questions or make comments, just focused on repairing my face, while my bridesmaid sat around trying to keep the mood light. My cousin mentioned casually that she'd always thought Melissa was a bit intense about our friendship. The other bridesmaids jumped on that comment like they'd been waiting for permission to say something. One of them brought up how Melissa used to get upset if I made plans without including her. Another mentioned the time Melissa cried at my birthday party because I'd seated her at a different table than me during dinner. A third bridesmaid said Melissa had called her multiple times asking why I seemed distant lately and if she knew whether Ryan was causing problems in our friendship. They all started sharing observations about controlling behavior they'd noticed over the years, but never mentioned because they didn't want to cause drama or make me defensive about my best friend. I learned that Melissa had called each of them over the past month. She'd asked them to report any concerns about Ryan or our relationship, any red flags they noticed, any suspicious behavior. She'd created a shared document where she was tracking Ryan's social media activity and asked them to contribute information about his posts, his comments, his tagged photos. They'd all declined to participate, but nobody told me about it because they thought it was weird but harmless. Just Melissa being overprotective like always. Now they realized it was part of her surveillance operation, and they felt guilty for not warning me sooner. I sat in the chair while they talked and realized how many people had seen signs of Melissa's obsession, but dismissed them as quirks of our friendship. How many warning signs I'd ignored because I'd known her since 2nd grade and couldn't imagine she'd ever actually hurt me. The makeup artist finished blending foundation over my blotchy skin while my cousin kept talking about Melissa's weird behavior over the years. My phone buzzed on the vanity table and I grabbed it, expecting another text from Ryan checking if I was okay. Instead, the wedding coordinator's name flashed across the screen. I answered and heard traffic noise in the background mixed with raised voices. She apologized for calling, but said we had a situation at the venue. Melissa had shown up demanding to speak with me, and security was keeping her in the parking lot, but she refused to leave. The coordinator's voice dropped lower and she said, "Early arriving guests could see and hear everything, and Melissa was making quite a scene." I closed my eyes and felt my stomach twist into knots. My mother took the phone from my hand and spoke to the coordinator, asking for details about what Melissa was doing. The coordinator explained that Melissa had arrived with more folders and was trying to show papers to anyone who walked by. My father appeared in the doorway, already putting on his jacket. He said he would drive to the venue and handle this while I finished getting ready. I nodded and watched him leave, feeling grateful, but also guilty that my father had to deal with my former best friend's breakdown. The hairstylist worked on pinning my veil while I sat there trying not to cry again and ruin the makeup repairs. My phone stayed silent for 20 minutes, and I kept checking it obsessively. Then my father called, and I put him on speaker so my mother could hear too. He said he'd convinced Melissa to leave by promising that she and I would meet for coffee next week to talk everything through. His voice dropped to a whisper, and he added that I didn't actually have to follow through on that promise. He just needed something to make her leave. Relief washed over me, and I thanked him, my voice shaking. He said security had Melissa's photo and description now, and she wouldn't be allowed back on the property. My mother squeezed my shoulder and said we needed to get me into my dress. The bridesmaids left the room to give us privacy, and my mother unzipped the garment bag hanging on the closet door. The dress was ivory lace with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that I'd chosen 6 months ago with Melissa beside me giving opinions on every option. My mother helped me step into it carefully, lifting the heavy fabric over my head and smoothing it down my body. She fastened the dozens of tiny buttons running down my spine while I stared at myself in the full-length mirror. Despite everything that happened with Melissa, I still wanted to marry Ryan today. The chaos had actually made me more certain about him because I saw how he handled being stalked and publicly accused with dignity and honesty. He never lost his temper or said cruel things about Melissa, even when she deserved it. My mother finished with the buttons and stepped back to look at me. She started crying and said I looked beautiful, and I felt tears threatening to spill over again but forced them back. We loaded into my father's car at 12:30 with my dress carefully arranged across the back seat. The bridesmaids followed in a separate car, and we drove to the venue in silence. I watched the familiar streets pass by and thought about all the times Melissa and I had driven these same roads together. We arrived at the venue at 1, and I could see Ryan's car already parked near the entrance. The wedding coordinator met us at the door with a bright smile that didn't quite hide the stress in her eyes. She assured me that security had Melissa's photo and description, and she wouldn't be allowed on the property under any circumstances. I nodded and tried to focus on the fact that I was about to marry someone I love instead of dwelling on the friend I'd lost. The coordinator led us to the bridal suite where my bridesmaids were already touching up their makeup. Someone handed me a glass of champagne, but I couldn't drink it because my stomach felt too unsettled. At 1:45, the coordinator knocked and said it was time to line up. My father offered his arm and I took it, feeling the weight of my bouquet in my other hand. We walked to the ceremony space and I could hear music playing and guests talking in low voices. The ceremony began at 2 and the bridesmaids walked down the aisle one by one. Then the music changed to the wedding march and my father squeezed my arm. We stepped into view and I saw Ryan standing at the altar with his brother beside him. His eyes filled with tears when he saw me, and I knew we were both thinking about everything we went through to get to this moment. All the stalking and accusations and public humiliation that could have destroyed us, but somehow made us stronger instead. The officiant began speaking, and there was no sign of Melissa disrupting anything. I barely heard the opening words because I was scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. But everyone just smiled at us, and the ceremony continued smoothly. We reached the vow exchange, and Ryan pulled out the paper where he'd written his promises. He said he vowed to trust me and communicate honestly and protect our relationship from outside interference. His voice caught on that last part, and I squeezed his hand because we both knew what that really meant. It meant protecting us from people like Melissa who thought they knew what was best for our relationship better than we did. I read my own vows, promising the same things, plus a commitment to always choose him, even when other people tried to come between us. The officiant pronounced us married, and Ryan kissed me while our families clapped. We walked back down the aisle together, holding hands, and I felt both joy and sadness mixing in my chest. The person who should have been standing beside me as maid of honor wasn't there, and that absence was a wound that would take a long time to heal. But I had Ryan, and we'd survived something that would have broken weaker couples. The reception started with cocktail hour, and multiple guests approached us to apologize for what happened at the rehearsal dinner. They said they were glad we went through with the wedding and that we clearly belonged together. Ryan's mother, Carly, found me near the bar and pulled me into a tight hug. She whispered that I handled an impossible situation with grace, and she was proud to have me as her daughter-in-law. Her acceptance meant everything after watching her cry at the rehearsal dinner. We moved into the reception hall for dinner, and I tried to relax into the celebration. My phone vibrated in the small clutch I'd brought, and I pulled it out to check. An unknown number had sent several text messages, and I opened them, confused. Photos of Ryan and me from throughout our relationship filled the screen with captions analyzing our body language for signs of trouble. One photo from last Christmas had a caption saying, "I looked uncomfortable when Ryan's arm was around me." Another from a beach vacation pointed out that we weren't making eye contact in the picture. I realized Melissa was using someone else's phone to contact us, and I showed Ryan the messages. He looked at them and his jaw tightened. We decided right there to turn off both our phones for the rest of the reception. The first dance started and the DJ announced us as husband and wife. Ryan took my hand and led me to the dance floor while everyone watched. We swayed together and I finally started to relax into the moment. Ryan leaned down and whispered in my ear that we survived Melissa's investigation and public accusations, so we could probably survive anything marriage would throw at us. I laughed and realized he was right about that. Whatever challenges we faced in the future, they probably wouldn't involve a childhood best friend stalking us for a month and ambushing our rehearsal dinner with fake evidence. We'd already been through the worst and come out stronger on the other side. In the evening, Julia found me near the dessert table and touched my arm gently. She pulled me away from the other guests toward a quiet corner by the windows overlooking the garden. Her face had that serious look that meant she needed to say something important. She glanced around to make sure nobody could overhear us before she started talking. She told me she was really worried about Melissa based on what happened in the hotel lobby the night before. Melissa had cornered her for almost 20 minutes, asking bizarre questions about Ryan's behavior and whether Julia had ever seen him act suspicious around other women. Julia said Melissa's eyes looked wrong, like she wasn't fully present in the conversation. She kept repeating the same phrases about protecting me and making sure I was safe. Julia suggested that Melissa might need real professional help, not just an apology or a conversation. She said the obsessive behavior could get worse if Melissa didn't get treatment soon. I felt this heavy guilt settle in my chest because I should have noticed how bad things were getting. I'd known Melissa since we were 7 years old, and I'd missed all the warning signs that something was seriously wrong with her mental state. Julia squeezed my hand and said it wasn't my fault, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd failed my oldest friend by not recognizing she needed help before everything exploded at my rehearsal dinner. My father stood up to give his toast, and the entire reception hall went quiet. He raised his glass and smiled at Ryan and me sitting at the head table. He talked about how Ryan and I balanced each other perfectly, how Ryan's calm nature helped ground my tendency to overthink everything. He mentioned specific moments from the past year that showed how well we worked together as a team. He said he was thrilled to welcome Ryan into our family, and that he'd never seen me happier than I'd been since we got engaged. The whole time he was speaking, I noticed his eyes kept flicking toward the entrances to the reception hall. He was watching for Melissa, even though security had her photo and instructions to keep her out. His hand shook slightly when he raised his glass for the final part of the toast. He never mentioned the maid of honor or anything about last night's chaos. He kept everything focused on Ryan and me and our future together. But I could tell from the tension in his shoulders that he was prepared to stop talking immediately if Melissa appeared. When he finished, everyone clapped and Ryan stood up to hug him. My father whispered something in Ryan's ear that I couldn't hear, but Ryan nodded seriously in response. The reception ended at 10 p.m. and guests started leaving through the main doors. Ryan and I said goodbye to our families and thanked everyone for coming despite the drama from the night before. We walked out to our car in the parking lot and I kicked off my heels the second I got in the passenger seat. Ryan drove us toward the hotel where we were staying tonight before our flight tomorrow morning. For the first few minutes, we just sat in comfortable silence, both of us exhausted from the emotional weight of the past 2 days. Then Ryan brought up what we'd both been avoiding talking about all day. He said we needed to decide how to handle Melissa going forward, because this wasn't going to just go away on its own. I agreed, and we started making a plan right there in the car. We decided we needed clear boundaries with her, like no contact at all for at least 6 months. Ryan said we might need to consider legal action if she kept harassing us or our families. I felt sick thinking about getting lawyers involved with someone I'd grown up with, but I also knew he was right. Melissa had crossed so many lines that we couldn't just ignore what happened and hope she'd stop on her own. We got to the hotel and went up to our room. I sat on the bed and pulled out my phone. I told Ryan I wanted to unblock Melissa's number to see if there were any threatening messages we should document for legal purposes. He sat next to me while I went through the settings and removed the block. The messages started loading immediately. 27 texts from Melissa had come through since I blocked her this morning. I started reading them out loud to Ryan. The first few were angry, calling me ungrateful and saying I'd made a huge mistake excluding her from the wedding. Then there were messages picking apart every choice we'd made for the ceremony. She criticized my dress, The flowers, the music, even the way Ryan and I had walked down the aisle together. She said the whole wedding looked cheap and rushed, but then the tone shifted and the messages became desperate apologies. She begged me to reconsider ending our friendship. She said she knew she'd made mistakes, but everything she did came from a place of love. She wrote that I was the most important person in her life, and she couldn't imagine her world without me in it. Reading them made my chest hurt because I could hear her voice in every word. Ryan took my phone and read through the messages himself. When he finished, he set it down on the nightstand and turned to face me. He said we should talk to a lawyer when we got back from our honeymoon about getting a restraining order if Melissa's behavior continued. I nodded because I knew it was the smart thing to do, but the idea of taking legal action against someone I'd known since childhood made me want to throw up. Melissa and I had shared everything growing up. She was there for my first day of middle school, my first breakup, my college acceptance letters. We'd planned our future weddings together when we were teenagers, promising we'd be each other's maids of honor. Now I was talking about getting a court order to force her to stay away from me. Ryan could see how upset I was, and he suggested we make a deal. We'd handle all the Melissa stuff after our trip and just try to enjoy our honeymoon without letting this hang over us the whole time. I agreed, and we both turned off our phones completely. We left for Italy the next morning on an early flight. The first few days were beautiful, but I couldn't fully relax. I kept checking my phone even though I'd promised Ryan I wouldn't. I expected messages from Melissa every time I turned it on. Some new crisis or dramatic gesture, but there was nothing. She'd been completely silent since the wedding ended yesterday. On day 3, Ryan gently pointed out that I was spending more time staring at my phone than looking at the actual Italian countryside we were driving through. He said I should try to be present on our trip instead of waiting for the next disaster with Melissa. He was right, and I felt bad that I was letting her ruin our honeymoon, even though she wasn't actually contacting us. I put my phone in my suitcase and didn't check it again for 2 days. On day 5 of our honeymoon, I finally looked at my email while Ryan was in the shower. There was a message from my mother with the subject line, "Melissa showed up." My stomach dropped as I opened it. Mom wrote that on day 5 of our honeymoon, I finally looked at my email while Ryan was in the shower. There was a message from my mother with the subject line, "Melissa showed up." My stomach dropped as I opened it. Mom wrote that Melissa had come to their house that morning, asking if she could go through my old bedroom to collect some items she'd left there over the years. My mother told her no and asked her to leave, but Melissa didn't leave. She sat in her car parked across the street from my parents' house for 3 hours. My mother watched her through the living room window the entire time. Melissa just sat there staring at the house, not moving, not doing anything. Finally, around lunchtime, she drove away. My mother said she was really unsettled by the whole thing and wanted me to know what happened. I showed Ryan the email when he came out of the bathroom. We sat on the hotel bed and talked about whether this counted as stalking behavior that needed legal help. Ryan started listing everything Melissa had done in the past week. She'd harassed his sister Julia at her hotel. She'd shown up at our wedding venue after being told she wasn't welcome. She'd used someone else's phone to send us messages after I blocked her number. Now she was staking out my parents' house for hours. He said the pattern was clear and really concerning. Each incident by itself might seem small, but together they showed someone who wasn't respecting any boundaries at all. I realized he was right. This wasn't just a friend who was hurt about being excluded from my wedding. This was someone whose behavior was getting worse, not better. We made another decision right there in that Italian hotel room. We'd enjoy the rest of our honeymoon and deal with the Melissa situation when we got home. No more checking emails or worrying about what she might do next. We had 8 more days in Italy, and we were going to make the most of them. I felt so much better after deciding that. We spent the rest of the trip exploring small Italian cities and eating at local restaurants. We visited museums and walked through ancient ruins. We took a cooking class and learned to make fresh pasta. We drank wine on terraces overlooking the countryside. For those last 8 days, I was able to push Melissa out of my mind and just focus on starting our marriage the right way. Ryan and I grew closer during that time, making plans for our future and talking about the life we wanted to build together. We flew home 2 weeks after we left and landed late at night. The next morning, we went to our apartment to start unpacking and settling back into normal life. There was a package sitting outside our door addressed to both of us. No return address, but I recognized Melissa's handwriting immediately. Ryan carried it inside, and we stared at it on the kitchen counter for a few minutes before opening it. Inside was a scrapbook, the kind with a leather cover and thick pages. Melissa had made it herself, documenting our entire friendship from 2nd grade through college. There were photos of us at every age, ticket stubs from movies we'd seen together, notes we'd passed in class, programs from the school plays we'd been in. Every page was carefully designed with captions and dates. It was actually beautiful, and looking through it made me cry. But there was also a note tucked into the back. Melissa wrote that she was sorry for how things ended between us. She said she understood I was angry and hurt, but she stood by her decision to test Ryan because protecting me was worth losing our friendship. She said she'd rather have me hate her and be safe than have me love her and end up in a bad marriage. Reading those words made me realize that Melissa genuinely believed she'd done the right thing, which somehow made everything worse. I opened the scrapbook on the kitchen counter and started turning through the pages. There was a photo from 2nd grade where we were missing our front teeth and holding hands on the playground. Another from middle school at the science fair, where we'd built a volcano together. Our high school graduation with our arms around each other. College move-in day. My engagement party where she was smiling so wide her eyes were almost closed. Every page had little notes in her handwriting about what we were doing that day and how much fun we'd had. I started crying looking at all those years of friendship documented so carefully. Ryan came over and put his arm around me while I wiped my eyes with my sleeve. The scrapbook was actually beautiful and clearly took her hours to make, but it also felt like she was trying to make me feel bad for setting boundaries. Like she was saying, look at everything we've been through. How can you throw this away? Ryan suggested we put it in the closet for now and focus on getting settled into married life. He said we needed to decide what to do about her behavior, but we didn't have to make that decision today. I closed the scrapbook and put it on the top shelf where I wouldn't see it every time I walked past. The next morning, I called my doctor's office and asked if they could recommend a therapist. The receptionist gave me 3 names and I started calling them right away. The first 2 didn't have any openings for at least a month. The third one had a cancellation and could see me in 2 weeks. I booked the appointment immediately and felt a little better just knowing I'd have someone to talk to about everything. I needed help sorting through all the feelings I had about losing my oldest friendship. There was grief because I missed her, anger because of what she'd done to Ryan and ruined our rehearsal dinner, betrayal because she'd been lying to me for a month while she stalked my husband, and guilt because part of me wondered if I'd missed signs that she was struggling this badly. All of it was too much to process on my own. Ryan and I spent the next few days unpacking boxes in our new apartment and trying to feel normal again. We'd signed the lease before the wedding and moved our stuff in while we were on our honeymoon. Now we were arranging furniture and hanging pictures and doing all the regular things newlyweds do. It felt good to focus on something simple and positive instead of thinking about the disaster our wedding weekend had turned into. We made dinner together in our new kitchen. We picked out which closet would be whose. We argued about where to put the couch. Normal couple stuff that made me feel like maybe we could move past all the drama and just be happy. 3 days after we got back from Italy, my phone rang while I was putting dishes away. It was my mother. She said Melissa had called her that morning asking for my new address. Mom told her she didn't have it, which wasn't exactly true since she'd helped us move in. Melissa had asked multiple times and even offered to come pick up the address in person so they could talk about me. My mother had finally told her to stop calling and hung up. Hearing that made my stomach drop. The fact that Melissa was trying to find out where we lived scared me in a way her other behavior hadn't. It meant she wasn't backing off. It meant she was still actively trying to get to me even after everything that happened. I thanked my mom for not giving her our address and for telling me about the calls. After I hung up, I sat down on the couch and felt my hands shaking. Ryan came out of the bedroom and saw my face and asked what was wrong. I told him about Melissa trying to get our address from my mother. He sat down next to me and we both just stared at the wall for a minute. Then he said we needed to talk to a lawyer. I found a lawyer online who specialized in harassment and restraining orders. Her website said she'd worked with stalking victims before. We made an appointment for the next day. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Melissa showing up at our door or following us around like she'd followed Ryan. I kept checking the windows to make sure no one was outside watching our apartment. Ryan noticed me getting up for the 3rd time and asked if I wanted to sleep with the bedroom door locked. We'd never locked our bedroom door before, but I said yes, and he got up and turned the lock. It helped a little, but I still barely slept. The lawyer's office was in a building downtown. We took the elevator to the 4th floor and checked in with the receptionist. The lawyer came out to get us after a few minutes. Her name was on the door, but I'm not going to say it here. She brought us into her office and asked us to explain the situation from the beginning. Ryan and I took turns telling her everything. The stalking during the month before the wedding, the hired woman at the gym, the fake social media account, the disguise at the bachelor party, the security footage she'd collected, the rehearsal dinner disaster, Melissa harassing his sister at her hotel, showing up at our wedding venue after being uninvited, using someone else's phone to contact us, staking out my parents' house, now trying to get our new address. The lawyer took notes the whole time and asked questions about dates and times, and whether we had any of this document. The lawyer took notes the whole time and asked questions about dates and times, and whether we had any of this documented. Ryan pulled out his phone and showed her the text messages Melissa had sent from the unknown number. I showed her the emails and the photos from the rehearsal dinner that guests had sent me. The lawyer looked through everything carefully. Then she said we had a strong case for a restraining order if we wanted to pursue it. She explained that harassment and stalking were taken seriously by the courts, especially when there was this much documentation. She said the pattern of behavior was clear and showed someone who wasn't respecting boundaries. She asked if we wanted to file for a restraining order right away, or if we wanted to try other options first. Ryan and I looked at each other. Neither of us wanted to take legal action against someone I'd known since childhood. It felt too serious and too final. The lawyer must have seen our hesitation because she suggested sending a formal cease and desist letter first. She explained that it would be a legal document telling Melissa to stop all contact with us and our families. It would be sent certified mail so we'd have proof she received it. If she violated the letter by contacting us again, we'd have documentation to strengthen a restraining order order case. That felt like a better first step. It gave Melissa one clear chance to stop on our own before we involved the courts. We told the lawyer yes. We wanted to do the cease and desist letter. She said she'd draft it and have it ready for us to review in a couple days. We paid her retainer fee and left the office. In the car on the way home, I felt both relieved that we were taking action and sad that it had come to this point. I was about to send a legal letter to my best friend since second grade, telling her to leave us alone. The lawyer emailed us the draft of the cease and desist letter 2 days later. It was formal and clear. It listed all of Melissa's behavior and stated that she must stop all contact with us, our families, our workplaces, and our home. It said she couldn't call, text, email, or approach us in person. It said if she violated these terms, we would pursue legal action, including a restraining order. Reading it made everything feel very real and very serious. Ryan and I both approved the letter, and the lawyer sent it certified mail that afternoon. She said Melissa would have to sign for it, so we'd know exactly when she received it. Now, we just had to wait and see if she would respect it or if we'd need to take the next step. 4 days later, the lawyer called to say the letter had been delivered and signed for. Melissa had gotten it. I spent the rest of that day feeling anxious and checking my phone constantly, even though I'd blocked her number. I kept expecting her to show up somewhere or find a way to contact us. But nothing happened that day or the next day. By the third day, I started to think maybe the letter had worked. Maybe seeing it in formal legal language had made her understand how serious this was. Maybe she was finally going to leave us alone. Then a thick envelope showed up in our mailbox with Melissa's handwriting on it. My hands were shaking when I pulled it out. Ryan was at work, so I was alone in the apartment. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened it. Inside was a 10-page handwritten letter on notebook paper.
The handwriting got messier as the pages went on, like she'd been writing faster and faster. She started by saying she understood I was angry, and that she accepted responsibility for how things had turned out. Then she launched into this long explanation of her entire thought process behind testing Ryan. She wrote about her sister's marriage 3 years ago, and how the husband had been cheating the whole time, but nobody knew until after the wedding.
She wrote about how devastated her sister had been, and how it took her years to recover. She wrote about her own fear of abandonment that started when her dad left when she was 8. She wrote about how I was the only stable relationship in her life, and the only person who felt like real family. She wrote that the thought of me ending up in a bad marriage like her sister was unbearable. She wrote that she knew her methods were extreme, but she truly believed she was protecting me from potential heartbreak. The letter was heartbreaking to read. I could see the pain and fear behind everything she'd done, but it didn't change the fact that her behavior was wrong and harmful. It didn't change that she'd stalked my husband and ruined our rehearsal dinner and scared both of us. Understanding why she did it didn't make it okay. I put the letter back in the envelope and called Ryan at work to tell him it had arrived. He said we should forward it to the lawyer so she'd have it on file. I took a photo of all 10 pages and emailed them to her. Then I put the letter in a drawer with all the other documentation we were keeping. 2 weeks later, I had my first therapy appointment. The office was in a quiet building near the park. The therapist's waiting room had comfortable chairs and magazines and soft music playing. When she called me back to her office, I sat down on the couch and immediately started crying. I cried through most of that first session. I told her about my friendship with Melissa starting in second grade. I told her about all the years of sleepovers and inside jokes and being there for each other through everything. I told her about the stalking and the rehearsal dinner and the cease and desist letter. I cried about losing someone who had been part of my life for so long. The therapist handed me tissues and listened without interrupting. When I finally stopped crying, she said something that helped. She said I could grieve the friendship while also recognizing that Melissa's behavior was wrong. She said it's possible to hold both truths at the same time. I could be sad about losing my best friend and also know that I made the right choice in setting boundaries. Those two things didn't cancel each other out. She said grief is complicated, and I didn't have to choose between missing Melissa and protecting myself. I could do both. That made sense to me in a way nothing else had. I left that first session feeling like maybe I could get through this with help. 2 weeks after the cease and desist letter, Ryan called me from work in the middle of the day. His voice was tense. He said Melissa had just shown up at his office building trying to get past security. She'd been carrying a folder and telling the security guard she had important information for Ryan about healthy marriage communication. The guard had asked her to leave, but she'd refused and kept insisting she needed to see him. Finally, they'd threatened to call the police, and she'd left. But the whole interaction had been caught on the building security cameras. Ryan had already talked to his boss in building security about getting the footage. He asked if I thought we should send it to our lawyer. I said yes immediately. This was exactly what the cease and desist letter had told her not to do. She'd violated it by coming to his workplace. We now had proof that she wasn't respecting our legal boundaries. That evening, we went to Ryan's office and got a copy of the security footage. We forwarded it to our lawyer, along with a written statement from the security guard who dealt with Melissa. The lawyer called us the next morning and said this strengthened our case significantly. She asked if we were ready to file for a restraining order. Ryan and I talked about it for a long time that night. It felt like such a big step, but Melissa had proven she wasn't going to stop on her own. We told the lawyer yes, we wanted to file for the restraining order. The lawyer filed the paperwork and we got a court date 3 weeks out. Those 3 weeks felt like waiting for something terrible to happen. Every time my phone rang, I jumped. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway outside our apartment, I froze. Ryan started walking me to my car after work because we were both nervous about Melissa showing up. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. We got dressed in business clothes and drove to the courthouse downtown. Our lawyer met us outside and went over what would happen. She said Melissa had been notified of the hearing and had the right to be there. She said the judge would hear from both sides and then make a decision. We walked into the courtroom and sat at one table with our lawyer. Melissa was already there, sitting at the other table by herself. She decided to represent herself instead of hiring a lawyer. She looked terrible. Her hair wasn't brushed and she was wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled shirt. She wouldn't look at me. The judge came in and we all stood up. Then the hearing began. Our lawyer presented all our documentation, the text messages, the emails, the timeline of stalking behavior, the witness statements from Julia and my parents, the security footage from Ryan's office building, the cease and desist letter, and proof that Melissa had violated it. It took almost an hour to go through everything. Then the judge asked Melissa if she wanted to respond. She stood up and started talking in line of stalking behavior, the witness statements from Julia and my parents, the security footage from Ryan's office building, the cease and desist letter, and proof that Melissa had violated it. It took almost an hour to go through everything. Then the judge asked Melissa if she wanted to respond. She stood up and started talking in this shaky voice. She said she was trying to protect me from a potentially bad marriage. She said her methods were unusual, but they came from a place of love. She said she never meant to scare anyone or cause harm. She said she just wanted to make sure Ryan was good enough for me because I deserved the best. She talked for maybe 10 minutes and the judge listened without interrupting. When she finished, the judge asked her if she understood that her behavior constituted stalking and harassment under the law. Melissa said she didn't see it that way, but she understood that we did. The judge looked at all the paperwork again. Then he said based on the evidence presented and the clear pattern of unwanted contact, he was granting us a 1-year restraining order. He said Melissa had to stay at least 500 FT away from us, our home and our workplaces. He said she couldn't contact us directly or indirectly through other people. He said if she violated the order, she could be arrested. Melissa started crying when he said that. The judge asked if she understood the terms, and she nodded yes. Then the hearing was over. We walked out of the courthouse and I felt this weird mix of relief and sadness. Relief because we finally had legal protection. Sadness because my best friend since childhood had become someone I needed legal protection from. That felt completely surreal. Ryan put his arm around me as we walked to the parking lot. I started crying before we even got to the car. He held me while I sobbed against his shoulder. I was grieving the friendship that was truly over now. There was no going back from a restraining order. No chance of reconciliation or working things out. It was done. Ryan didn't try to make me feel better or tell me it would be okay. He just held me and let me cry until I couldn't cry anymore. Then we got in the car and drove home to start figuring out how to move forward with our lives. Over the next few months, Melissa stayed away from us completely. She didn't show up at our apartment or Ryan's office or any of the places we normally went. My mother called me one afternoon in early spring and said she'd run into one of Melissa's coworkers at the grocery store. The coworker mentioned that Melissa had been asking about me through mutual friends trying to find out how I was doing without violating the restraining order. My mother also heard that Melissa started seeing a therapist twice a week and was apparently working through some things. I felt this weird mix of relief that she was getting help and sadness that our friendship had gotten so broken that she needed professional intervention to deal with losing me. Ryan asked if I wanted to reach out somehow, maybe through my mother as a go-between, but I told him I wasn't ready for any contact, even indirectly. The restraining order gave me space to breathe and figure out my own feelings without worrying about what Melissa might do next. Ryan and I settled into married life in our new apartment across town from where we'd both lived before. We unpacked boxes together and argued about where to put furniture and learned each other's habits in a way we hadn't when we were just dating. I discovered that Ryan sorted his socks by color and always made the bed before leaving for work. And he learned that I couldn't function before coffee and liked to reorganize the kitchen cabinets every few weeks. We were more careful with each other after everything that happened with Melissa. We checked in more often about how we were feeling and made sure to talk through small annoyances before they became big problems. Ryan started telling me his full schedule each week without me asking, not because I demanded it, but because he wanted me to feel secure. I made sure to introduce him to my friends and include him in plans instead of keeping parts of my life separate the way I used to. The whole experience with Melissa had taught us that protecting our relationship meant being intentional about communication and boundaries. We were stronger as a couple because we'd survived someone actively trying to destroy our trust, and we knew we could handle normal marriage problems if we could handle that. His mother, Carly, called me every Sunday to check in, and my parents invited Ryan to their house for dinner every other week. Our families had rallied around us during the crisis, and they stayed close afterward, which made us feel supported in a way that mattered. 6 months after the wedding, I sat in my therapist's office and talked about how much better I felt compared to those first awful weeks. I'd been going to therapy every week since we got back from our honeymoon, and it was helping me process the grief of losing Melissa. My therapist had helped me understand that toxic friendships could damage you just as much as toxic romantic relationships, maybe more because you didn't expect your best friend to hurt you on purpose. I told her about the guilt I still carried for not seeing the warning signs earlier, all those times Melissa had been controlling or possessive that I'd dismissed as her being protective. My therapist pointed out that Melissa's behavior had probably been building for years in small ways that were easy to rationalize until they suddenly weren't. She said I couldn't blame myself for trusting someone I'd known since 2nd grade, and that learning to set boundaries wasn't cruel, even when it hurt someone you cared about. I was learning to forgive myself for not recognizing how unhealthy our friendship had become, for not understanding that Melissa's obsession with protecting me was really about her own fear of abandonment. The therapy sessions gave me tools to work through the complicated emotions without getting stuck in them, and I could feel myself getting lighter each week. My therapist spent one whole session helping me understand that I couldn't have prevented Melissa's breakdown or fixed her issues through friendship alone. She explained that Melissa's obsessive behavior had likely developed over many years, probably starting long before she met Ryan, or even knew I was in a serious relationship. Some people needed professional help that friends couldn't provide no matter how much they cared or how long they'd known each other. My therapist said that protecting myself and my marriage was the right choice, even though it meant ending a 20-year friendship, and that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was step back and let someone face the consequences of their actions. She reminded me that I'd tried to talk to Melissa multiple times, that I'd given her chances to stop the stalking and testing, and that she'd chosen to escalate instead of listening. The restraining order wasn't me being cruel or abandoning a friend in need. It was me setting a necessary boundary to keep myself and Ryan safe from someone whose behavior had become dangerous. I left that session feeling like a weight had lifted off my chest, like I finally had permission to stop feeling guilty for choosing my own well-being over Melissa's feelings. Ryan and I celebrated our 1-year anniversary on a quiet Tuesday evening at home. We ordered takeout from the restaurant where we'd had our first date and ate it on our couch while looking through photos from the wedding. We talked about how far we'd come since that chaotic rehearsal dinner and wedding weekend, how we'd managed to build a good life together despite everything Melissa had tried to destroy. Ryan said he was grateful we didn't let her behavior ruin our relationship or make us suspicious of each other, that we'd chosen to trust each other instead of letting her tests and accusations plant seeds of doubt. I told him I was thankful for how he'd handled being stalked with so much patience, and how he'd supported me through losing my oldest friend without ever making me feel bad about grieving that loss. We both agreed that the trauma had actually made us better partners, because it forced us to be intentional about communication and boundaries from the very beginning of our marriage. The restraining order would expire in a few months, and we'd need to decide whether to renew it, but we agreed to cross that bridge when we got there. For now, we were focused on building our life together, on the daily routines and small joys that made up a marriage, on being happy in the present instead of worrying about what Melissa might or might not do when the legal protection ended. I still thought about Melissa sometimes when I drove past places we used to go together, or when I saw something that reminded me of our childhood. I wondered if she was doing better, if therapy was helping her understand why she'd become so obsessed with testing Ryan and protecting me from a threat that didn't exist. Part of me hoped she was healing and learning healthier ways to handle her abandonment fears and attachment issues, but I'd accepted that our friendship was over and that was okay, even though it still hurt sometimes. Some relationships weren't meant to last forever, even when they started in 2nd grade and shaped your entire childhood. Ryan and I were happy in our little apartment with our routines and our Sunday calls with his mother and our weekly dinners with my parents. Our families were supportive, and we'd learned valuable lessons about boundaries and trust that would serve us well throughout our marriage. Our families were supportive, and we'd learned valuable lessons about boundaries and trust that would serve us well throughout our marriage.